Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto created a criminal organization. When Naruto Uzumaki's dream of becoming Hokage is seemingly stolen from him, he discovers a new path. One even more difficult and harder to reach. With a family of his own making, he will take the world by storm, showing them that rogues and outcasts of the world can stand at the top. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 17, The Next Steps. Sazanami had never been this far south before. The Great Divide had always been his hunting grounds. The land of stone, birds, keys, mountains, fangs, claws, cedar, and valleys, he had been to all of them and had a very broad view of different climates and terrain. Some of those climates were a little uncomfortable, but nothing too extreme that someone couldn't acclimate it after a day or two. He would like to think that such changes never even bothered him. The northern desert of the Land of Wind proved him wrong. It was ridiculous how intense the heat was. Even after working 10 years in front of a blazing forge, he couldn't tolerate this. He had already taken his jacket off and turned it into a shawl of sorts. Losing his favorite hat back during his capture was a personal loss for him. He had taken it off his first bounty, a sign of his change to seeking out his prey. Sadly, it fell into the river right after he was taken away. Sure, it was falling apart, but he felt kind of naked without it. Perhaps it was for the best. He wasn't a bounty hunter any longer, so its symbolism wasn't a part of him any longer. Sazanami really just wished he had it right now to block the sun. "How are you guys doing?" he called back to his trio of kids. They were lagging behind slightly. Their constitution likely was as strong as his, so they had to hydrate a lot more. With this being their third day in this god-forsaken place, even he was starting to get a little frustrated. Blazing heat during the day. Frigid cold at night. How could anyone live in this place, let alone bother to set up any kind of sanctuary? "I'm all right," Sasami gasped. "I'll manage," Menma said. Gurpostala, their fearless leader, garbled, nonsensically. He looked to the worse of all of them. His body swaying back and forth, hunched over like an elderly man. If anything, the kid was shambling on like a zombie. "Hey, you doing all right there, son?" "Don't know if I can go on." The kid groaned. "Drink some water. You need to stay hydrated." "No thanks, I'm not thirsty." Sazanami rolled his eyes. Sure, the kid was strong, but there was no need for him to act tough here. That sort of arrogant thinking would only get him killed. The elements weren't something you could shrug off. It was an adversary that no one could face. "Drink it, kid," Sazanami said, holding out his canteen. "You weren't doing yourself any favors wearing those dark dress clothes here in the desert. You'll die of heat stroke at this rate." The blonde scowled at him. "I said I'm not thirsty, and I'm certainly not hot either, see?" Naruto placed the back of his hand against his face. Sazanami jolted at how cold the kid's hand felt. In fact, he couldn't see a single drop of sweat on the kid's face. Compared to himself, Naruto felt like ice. How in the world? He. Don't underestimate me. I was taught the meditation exercises that the monks of this land do outside for days at a time. I don't get hot or cold, Naruto proclaimed smugly. Sazanami cocked an eyebrow. "Then why the hell are you acting like you're about to keel over?" 10 days, 12 hours, 33 minutes, the kid muttered. "What?" The kid's eyes widened in horror. A genuine look of despair etched on his face. "That's how long I've gone without ramen. If I don't get some soon, I don't think I'm going to make it." If Sazanami wasn't sweating in his own fluids, he would have laughed at how ridiculous the kid's claim was. Normally, he was pretty calm about people's quirks and eccentric behaviors, but this moment wasn't one of those times. He didn't know how someone so unbelievable could exist in this world. But he was the adult here. He would stay calm. "Really? You want a hot bowl of ramen in this weather?" Naruto nodded, rubbing his arm. "I'm going through withdrawal. It's really bad." The former hunter cringed at how stupid it was. So stupid that his feelings of heat exhaustion couldn't hold back his laughter at the sheer ridiculousness of Naruto's mannerism. Acting like going without some noodles and broth was the same thing as a bad drug addiction. It was such a spot-on example of a serious medical issue. That's why it really made him laugh. Naruto-kun, I actually got something for when we left for the hidden tunnel, Sasami said. She dug into her bag, pulling out a white cup. On the front was an image of a steaming bowl of ramen. It's only the cheap instant kind but dash. Sazanami felt a gust of wind hit his face. Enough force it nearly made him tumble off the dune they were trekking over. He opened his eyes to see Naruto gone. Completely vanished from his view. Only to turn around to see the kid holding Sasami up, twirling her around in circles. Oh Sasami-chan. You're truly the most beautiful and thoughtful woman I know. I could just kiss you. The girl sputtered. What? Kiss me. Absolutely, whatever you want. Naruto nodded, placing her back down. Next thing everyone saw him grasping her rosy cheeks, pulling her in for a deep and full-blown lip lock. Naruto clearly misunderstood her confusion as a request. The girl in question was surprised by the action but didn't show any signs of discomfort in it. "Na Naruto-kun," the girl mumbled, taking a few steps back. Her face was completely red. The former hunter could practically see steam coming out of her ears as she swayed back and forth. Overheating in the desert wasn't ideal at this moment. This was overkill. Naruto took the cup from her hands just as she fell backwards. The kid looked blissfully unaware of the state he had put Sasami in, completely engrossed with reading the words of the cup of ramen. Luckily Menma was there to catch her before she fell. The taller blonde fretting over how disoriented the girl was. "Oh sweet ramen. I'll savor every bite." Naruto cooed. He caressed the piece of styrofoam and plastic like it was a precious gem. He acted like he was in his own little world. "Thank you Sasami-chan." "MMMHRRR," Sasami moaned. She was completely out of it at the moment. "Hand on Sasami!" Menma shouted, freaking out over her condition like it was fatal. "We'll get help. Just stay with us." Sazanami was beginning to think following them was a bad idea. He sighed knowing he had already made this bed though. "Naruto, can you take a moment from your swooning to see if we're close yet? How much longer will it take us to get there?" What did you say?" "Oh right, the hideout. Yeah, we've been circling it for the last hour," Naruto replied, barely sparing a glance to him. Sazanami's jaw dropped. "What? The past hour? Then why didn't you say anything?" "Thought it was a mirage from ramen deprivation," he stated matter-of-factly. Palming his face, Sazanami took a deep breath to keep himself calm. He wanted to do nothing more than bury the kid in the sand and leave him there. Sadly, the kid was the one holding the key and actually knew what they were supposed to be looking for. So right now he had other priorities. Like getting out of this heat. Walking up to the peak of the dune, Sazanami saw the large outcrop of large rocks that rose out of the sand. In fact, it looked as though they were situated within a naturally formed crater. The slope downwards was steep, angling past 45 degrees. Which, ironically, was probably how hot it was out here as well. "Are you sure this is it?" "Yup, my sensei said I would know it when I saw it," Naruto explained, holding out the small map in the black book. "All that was marked was a small X. Normally that wouldn't be very helpful unless that was the thing we were supposed to look for." As you can see, it was true. Two of the large rocks were positioned diagonally. One resting in front of the other, making them look crisscrossed. It formed the triangular entrance to the outcrop. Looking at it from the right angle made it appear to be a giant X mark in the middle of this sea of sand. Not the most subtle of markings, but in a desert so big and empty the chances of anyone finding it all the way out here were slim to none. He slid down the sand, eager to get out of the elements. If nothing else, the rocks would give better protection than anything they had seen these past few days. They had been lucky not to have any serious sandstorms, but the hunter knew it was only a matter of time. They really hadn't been prepared for this journey, so hopefully there would be real supplies they could use when they decided to leave. Walking through the entranceway, they found the rocks had been arranged into a circle. With each being many times taller than a typical person, it left much of the sides covered in shade. Sazanami felt 10 degrees cooler just by standing next to them. He ruffled his kimono, letting the air cool down his body. The others came shambling in as well. Naruto was carrying Sasami on his back with Menma carrying all their bags. The look on the former two's faces was one of relief. Naruto was grumbling about a rock in his shoe or something. Menma let of a sigh as he dropped the bags. So this is where the entrance you spoke about is, Naruto. There was a bit of skepticism in the musical kid's tone. Not that it was unfounded. Just by a quick glance there didn't seem to be any sort of entranceway or door. Sure, the rocks looked like they were unnaturally arranged, but other than that it just looked like a typical outcrop. It would make sense if they made it hard to spot if they were trying to hide something. However, making it too well hidden would certainly put a damper on this entire trip. My sensei didn't say. He gave me this though, the boy said, pulling out a small dagger from his pouch. Saying it was the key to open the door. Sazanami frowned. He had never seen a blade like that before. During his travels he had come across similar ones. They were foreign to this continent, coming from distant lands across the ocean. The blade itself wasn't the typical dull metal silver, rather it was coated red. Not the typical hue of copper, brass, or bronze either. A type of special, or maybe, he mused. Some metals naturally altered the blade's color. Typically not doing more than just that though. Taking the blade from the blonde he held it out. The thing was horribly unbalanced. Most weight distributed to the tip of the blade. It certainly wasn't meant for cutting or for anything ceremonial from its aesthetic. Definitely not for fighting either. No, its purpose as some sort of key made sense. It was how it opened this hideout that was the big mystery. Pretty neat, huh? Naruto commented. It was really useful for traveling. Thanks to it we never got lost. You didn't get lost because of a blade. Yeah. Let me show you. Naruto placed the blade on his palm flat. It began to wobble up and down, turning itself slowly in the opposite direction. Roughly north if he had his bearings correct. Blinking, Sazanami now realized what the blade was meant to do. It has a magnet embedded in the tip, he whispered. Shaking his head he couldn't help but chuckle. Your sensei was quite the character. Such a novel way of finding the entrance. Really? I don't get it. Sazanami held the blade out, pressing it against the rock formation. As he suspected, the blade was being repelled by the strong magnetite minerals within the rock. At a closer glance much of this formation could also have lodestone embedded in it as well. It would be quite the feat to do such a thing, but ninjas did have certain abilities that would make it more feasible. The blade is a magnet with a strong pull towards the north. These rocks are similar so they repel one another. If I'm understanding your sensei correctly, then the entrance will be the opposite. The blade should stick to the entrance like glue. Wow, I never would have thought of that. You really know a lot, Sazanami. As a blacksmith I had to be familiar with all types of metals. It's not that complicated once you understand the base characteristics. Let's just find the entrance already. I'm getting sick of the heat. Taking the lead for the search, Sazanami traced the blade against the rock walls. Going slowly to ensure he got every possible stop that the door may be. It wouldn't be high up, Sazanami figured. Even though something like that wouldn't matter much for a ninja, the hunter rationalized that it would be somewhere closer to the ground. Sadly, as he rounded back to the start, there were no signs of the entrance. Seems like there's only one place left, Naruto said. Everyone stand back. Hands blurring, the kid went through those hand signs that ninjas typically used. Taking in a massive breath of air, the kid's chest expanding almost to an extreme, he blew a missive gust of wind against the layer of sand at their feet. Wind style, immense breakthrough. Shielding his eyes, the former hunter saw that the surface below the sand isn't as deep as initially assumed. A bronze-colored rock, similar to those around them, became visible. It was faint, but he could roughly make out some patterns carved into the rock. The end result being a semi-submerged circle. Taking an easy guess, Sazanami drew the dagger over the center while wiping away the excess sand. A distinct slit carved into the rock was revealed. Waiting for no prompts, Sazanami felt the blade being pulled down towards it. A good sign that his theory of the magnet being a means of locating the door proved correct. An audible click as it turned on its own. Sazanami felt the ground shake. The circle he was kneeling on top of began to turn, with the edges slowly sinking into the ground. Like some kind of complex mechanism, the circle began to shift into different shapes, forming stair-like deviations in the stone. The whole stone itself looked like a rope being uncoiled, its end leading down underneath the ground into complete darkness. "So, who wants to go in first?" Naruto asked. The kid had the most wolfish grin he had ever seen, clearly excited about this journey actually proving true. While the hunter was also happy this hadn't been a waste of time, it left a burning question in his mind. Just who the hell was Naruto's sensei? Tsunade increased her stride as she was ushered through the hospital doors by Shizune, a pang of excitement in her chest. After several weeks of crap news and problems dumped on her lap, this was a spark of hope for her. Hell, it would certainly boost the morale of everyone in the village. Without a doubt everyone would be celebrating tonight. Something she would get in on. She ignored the scattered bunch of nurses and doctors that tried to talk to her. Whether they needed her for a problem, were trying to give her an update on the situation, or just looking for any confirmation, she brushed them off. These issues were a far second for her on the list of priorities. Even to the point she didn't put the fear of being blasted into the sky because it would delay her. Going into the restricted wing, she spotted Jiraiya already leaning against the wall opposite of the door. The two Umbu guards already kneeling for her arrival. It seemed like this was the real thing. After nearly 4 months, her sensei was not only awake but actually aware and alert. A big contrast to his bouts of minute consciousness. Sure, he wasn't close to being fully healed, but this was a large step in the right direction. "Princess," Jiraiya acknowledged, giving a brief nod. The man was still in his funk. Even after 2 weeks the man was less expressive about things. Not that she minded a less obtrusive and eccentric behavior from him. It was just to deal with someone when they were practically in a state of war mentality. He hadn't been happy about not being able to leave the village to go search for Naruto. Regrettably, there were other issues she needed his help with. Ones that affected the whole village. She had given him the same promise she had made with Naruto's friends. When there was a solid lead, then he could rush off in all his usual brazen foolishness. Going out trying to find someone who had masterfully disappeared would only be a waste. Then came the more personal slights against him. He had figured that he could use the reverse summoning on Naruto. A simple yet ingenious way to solve their biggest problem. That turned sour rather quickly as Lord Fukusaku and Lady Shima had appeared before them. Both looking aggravated to say the least, if the lumps on Jiraiya's head were any proof. Apparently Naruto's contract was voided with the Toads of Mount Miyabuku altogether. Something both parties of the contract must agree to first before allowing it. Sure, the relationship between a summoner and their summons could become violent, but the blood contract itself was binding. At least until they were told Naruto's name had vanished from the contract scroll. No trace of his DNA or fingerprints were present or found. It was like the boy's name had simply vanished. Meaning Naruto couldn't summon toads and vice versa. Needless to say, Jiraiya wasn't happy about it. "Have you gone in yet?" Tsunade asked. "I wanted to wait for you. Inoichi is in there along with Shikaku already. Everyone else has been cleared out." "What would you like me to do, my lady? Things are getting pretty restless out there," Shizune said. Grumbling, Tsunade turned to the window. A large mob was growing by the second. "I want you to coordinate with security. No matter what the reason, they cannot jeopardize hospital functions. Cat and Boar here will assist you." "Yes, Lord Fifth." The two Umbu bowed before following her apprentice. She sighed, taking in a deep breath. Pausing for a moment as she held the door handle to collect herself mentally and emotionally. Despite how little it would help her at the moment. "Let's do this then." She slid the door open. Doing so as quickly as humanly possible. Sure, that meant little to two shinobi who had been shinobi for 30 years, least of all to her sensei who had been a ninja since before she was born. It just felt better not to just burst in like an unwieldy storm. Ease was the preferred approach at this time. Tsunade could hear Shikaku talking to her sensei. Just basic questions about whether he knew where he was or things about himself. A general baseline that anyone trained in first aid could do to determine if a person was aware and alert. It was meant for people with concussions, so maybe not a one-to-one matchup for a 4-month-long coma. Sarutobi-sensei's voice sounded so frail. It was hard not to look back at the man who had trained her from a young age, regaling her of stories about learning under her grandfather and great-uncle. His strength was such a pillar of support for her. Like he could do anything. Even as he took time from his duties as Hokage to being their sensei, he always seemed to be larger than life. A hard contrast to now where he was barely clinging to it. Is there anything else you wished to ask Shikaku? Her sensei wheezed. He looked so old compared to the last time they spoke. He had begged her to come back to ensure the damage done to Anko by Orochimaru wouldn't kill her. It had been a very tense situation and luckily succeeded. Taken all together, it truly seemed Orochimaru was the source of all this pain. His actions certainly led her to face harsh circumstances. No, nothing else, Lord Third, Shikaka replied, however it seems like the Hokage wishes to speak to you now. The Hokage? The infirmed Sarutobi asked, clearly confused by this fact. Sliding back the curtain, she revealed herself. She could barely keep the dampness in her eyes from spreading. That look of realization on his face with that small but very heartwarming smile. It really tugged at her. Tsunade-chan, you're here. Hey there, sensei. I'm so glad you're awake. She placed herself on his left side, grasping his bandaged arms gently. Jiraiya followed suit on the other side. The both of them were there now. All together sans Orochimaru. The look of happiness on the aged man's face made all that suffering worth it. Knowing he had broken that horrid curse that all the Hokages faced. Her sensei lived. Jiraiya, you're both here? Yeah, sensei. Sorry we've been gone so long. That's okay. You both look well. Their sensei grunted, bearing through the pain to squeeze their hands. It was weak, but the message got across. How long have I been in? 4 months, Tsunade said. Your battle with Orochimaru when he attacked the village forced you to make use of jutsu that nearly killed you. The results were as expected. It destroyed the chakra network in Orochimaru's body but also caused significant damage to your arms. The former Kage frowned. Orochimaru attacked the Leaf Village. Tsunade paused. Yes, wait, don't you remember? Inoichi coughed. Sorry my lady, but there seems to have been some short-term memory loss. It's not unreasonable given the jutsu's outcome. The backlash affected Lord Third's entire body, including his hippocampus. She had already done many scans of his brain. Any signs of such effects could have been attributed to other injuries he may have sustained over the years. Her sensei preferred being the visitor at the hospital rather than the resident. How far back? Is it retrograde or is it more transient? Based on my dive, it seems to be the former of the two cases. How far back? How much has he forgotten? Jiraiya asked. Inoichi shrugged. I don't know. Lord Third's state isn't ideal for going that deep. Perhaps it's best then, if I told you all what I remember last. I could really use something to drink, Hiruzen coughed. Shakily he reached over to the table next to him for a glass of water. Jiraiya, already seeing this, grabbed it for him, holding it as their sensei took careful sips. Much better. I can tell it really has been 4 months since I feel like I haven't had a soothing cup of tea in ages. Sorry sensei, but you're restricted to water until I say otherwise. That goes double for smoking. Tsunade stated. Consider it both doctor's orders and an official command from the Hokage. Her sensei had an unreadable look on his face after hearing this. She wasn't sure what part of it made him give that blank expression. It would certainly piss her off if he started to complain about not being able to smoke when he struggled to pick up a single glass of water. So I finally get to rest now? Truly? Hiruzen asked. You have faced your past and have come to terms with it. Tsunade nodded. On reflex, she grasped her grandfather's necklace, which recently returned to her possession. I have. Despite her troubled past and the position she now filled, there was resolve to her decision. While she still felt herself a placeholder, there were now many opportunities to achieve goals that were impractical during the Great Wars. Eventually being able to pool more resources to the hospital and get more shinobi medical training would be a revolutionary change for the Hidden Leaf and the shinobi world. If nothing else, she would make that happen. While striving for that goal, Tsunade would prepare herself for anything else that came her way. No matter how bad the situation was. She and by extension, the Leaf Village would be ready for anything. And you, Jiraiya? Have you decided to take up your role left to you by Minato? The responsibility you must take for young Naruto. Except for that. The room went uncomfortably silent. Eyes shifting to one another on how to answer such a question. She had ordered such talk prohibited. There was no doubt Shikaku and Inoichi were good for following that order. Jiraiya on the other hand. He was still the joker in the deck at the moment. I will, sensei. You have my word. Jiraiya said without any hesitation. Good. Although you may have to wait until the boy finally graduates from the academy. I have a good feeling that he'll make it through this time. His dream is to become Hokage someday, you know. There it was. Said with so much certainty that it was hard to rebuke the words for a variety of different reasons. Tsunade took a chance. Sensei? How many times has Naruto attempted to graduate? Coincidentally, that is the last thing I can remember. Naruto and I went for ramen after he failed the academy exam for the second time. That happened last night to my recollection. Hiruzen explained. The Hokage turned to her Jonin commander, knowing he already knew the time frame better than she did. A look of surprise and concern was clear on the Nara's usual disinterested face. Shikaku shook his head. I'm sorry, Lord Third, but, well, that was roughly 20 months ago. 20 months, her sensei whispered, eyes widening in shock. That much time. Tsunade could only reel at this knowledge. So much had happened during that time. Information that may have been better left unsaid. She was already having a hard time dealing with how she would explain the last month's events, let alone another 19 on top of it. Even when something good happened, it seemed life continued to roll her a pair of ones. Whoa. That was pretty much the word that summed up everyone's thoughts at that moment. Noriyuki had told him that this had been his first hideout after he went rogue. Naruto figured it was something rugged and rough given how deep in the desert it was. Pretty much the opposite of a pillar of civilization. But since his sensei had lived in this land until he was 40 and didn't flee until he was a Jonin, then it made more sense he gave it all the creature comforts. He had the time after all. And then some, apparently. After taking back the dagger and descending down the spiral staircase, they reached the bottom. For a moment it was nothing but darkness save for the faint sunlight creeping in above. Reached the landing, a marking on the floor lit up, spreading throughout the darkness. Then like a switch, lights shone from the ceiling. Real, honest to goodness, lights. With actual electricity. Setting aside the fact it was a reasonable and cool temperature, that was probably the best thing he had seen since leaving Nagaya. All the inns they had stayed at were so rural that the power lines were out more often than not. He wasn't spoiled by any means, but after 2 weeks of trying to get here it seemed like a worthy reward by itself. Naruto, are you sure we're allowed to take what we want from here? Menma asked. I mean, will your sensei be upset? Yeah, I'm sure. Actually, I guess everything in here belongs to me now, Naruto corrected. The three of them, even a semi-recovered Sasami, gave him an incredulous look. Seeing this place now, it did sound a little unreasonable to claim that this place now actually belonged to him. Even now he was having a hard time believing it himself. Words could barely do this place justice. It was like they had stepped into a perfectly maintained palace and someone just handed them the keys to the place before taking off. It defied logic. But defined Noriyuki very well. He really just gave you all this? Sazanami questioned skeptically. Naruto raised his hands up defensively. Alright, full disclosure then, since this all seems a little crazy. My sensei happens to be one of my relatives. He is stupidly wealthy, so throwing away money is pretty much his go-to solution. It was a gift for doing well in my training. The former hunter hummed. Must be nice to be that rich. He. I'm hoping to reach that point myself. Sasami tugged on his sleeve as he was laughing like a lunatic. She still looked a bit tired from the trip. It really surprised him how she suddenly collapsed for no apparent reason. Naruto-kun, is there a place I can lay down for a bit? I feel a little dizzy. Of course. Let's take a quick look around before settling in. That was probably for the best. Getting their bearings of this gifted jewel should take priority. Standing in the main foyer just gaping wasn't what they came here for anyway. It was just hard not to when the ceiling looked like a clear blue sky. Whether it was just really great artwork or some elaborate genjutsu baffled Naruto. Knowing his sensei's interest in art, it was likely the former. From the main foyer it went into 3 different directions. To the right was what Naruto assumed to be the living area. It opened up to a fully functioning kitchen area. Turning the tap's actual water rushed out. How the hell it was drawing water from anywhere near here was basically magic. It was placed alongside a refrigerator and a stove. They would be cooking some decent meals while they stayed here. There sadly wasn't anything in the fridge, but the shelves were stocked with non-perishable food. Some of which was instant ramen. Naruto truly loved his grandfather. Past the kitchen was another hallway. 2 doors on each side and 1 at the end. They were bedrooms. Each fully furnished with beds, closets, nightstands, and even their own bathrooms. They were even better than his ones in his old apartment. He couldn't help but sulk that his sensei's throwaway stuff was substantially better than his own. The bedroom at the end was twice as large as the rest. Mainly because of how much larger the bed inside was. Naruto didn't need 3 guesses to know which room his sensei used in its intended purpose. Naruto may have loved his grandfather, but he knew the man a little too well. The hallway leading straight from the entrance was much wider than the sides. Only a single massive room this time. Not to say it wasn't impressive for what it was. The moment he opened the door, Naruto could feel a shift in the air. The humidity was greatly different compared to the more arid heat. Naruto wasn't sure what you would call it. A hothouse? Conservatory? It certainly didn't look like one of those glass-pane greenhouses he had seen in the Leaf Village. The best he could describe the large dome-like chamber was an extensive indoor garden. More light shone down on the plants below with greater intensity. Staggered drips of water were falling down from the ceiling. Very reminiscent of the last drops of rain you would see at the end of a storm. Truly it was an amazing feat. Not that Naruto was that big a fan of it. The only things that were planted were vegetables. Not even a single piece of fruit. He would likely avoid this area as much as possible. The coup de grace of this place had to be for the real reason they came all this way. On the left side of the base was the library, a spacious workshop and a chamber meant for training and testing new techniques. His grandfather hadn't let him down. While the library wasn't all that big, it was packed with scrolls and books he had acquired over his years of thievery. He already picked out some scrolls he found interesting. Mainly containing his information on his wind element. The only thing wrong with this setup was that it didn't seem there was any semblance of order to where they were placed. Worse yet was some of the scrolls were falling apart or were in languages Naruto couldn't even guess it. That was a real pain in the ass. However, there was still a large variety of techniques to scour through. Some that he figured could be very useful to Menma and Sasami in broadening their skills. Near the back he also happened upon some books containing swordsmanship and how to incorporate chakra into sword-style jutsus. He planned to give those to Sasami as he would probably make use of them better than he could. Putting all this amazing stuff there was a room in the back of the study. It was fairly spacious. Mainly because it was completely bare. There didn't seem to be anything interesting or unique about it. Naruto had assumed that the room was for storage or something and didn't give it another glance. As much as he wanted to tear through the library for anything useful, he found himself more interested in scrounging materials in the workshop instead. Sasami had complemented the forge that was built into the corner. With him here and the spare metal laying around, they could replenish their supply of kunai and shuriken. It was difficult to get more when you didn't have a shop down the street from where you lived to buy more. Who knew? Naruto had something else on his mind. This had been his grandfather's workshop. Meaning it made all the weapons and items he was frequent to use. The raw materials that he needed were already there. The only issue was putting them together. It truly was lucky to have someone who could make just about anything made of metal. Not seeing any reason not to waste this opportunity, he approached Sazanami, who was examining the different blades that were hanging from the wall. He looked happy to be doing something he was familiar with. Sazanami, I have a favor to ask you. He held out his crudely drawn diagram to the former blacksmith. There's a certain weapon I need help building. Remember to always seek out the knowledge and wisdom of those above you. There will always be those in the village willing to share their experience should a problem come up, Iruka explained. He was in his lecture mode right now. Classes were just about done for the day and he could see some of his students had already pre-packed their things to make a dash to the door. Normally he would be reprimanding such behavior, but today was different. Word around the upper circles was that Lord Third had finally awoken from his coma. It was monumental news and truly a great day for the Leaf Village that one of its greatest leaders and heroes was now awake. Everyone was excited because of it. Some more than others. The young Sarutobi was staring down the clock, barely containing himself in his seat. He had a very special relationship with his grandfather. Even as much as he claimed that the Third saw everyone in the village as family, Kano Amaru always had this special power to make their esteemed leader smile. With not being able to see him for 4 months, Kano Amaru had been extremely down. Especially with Naruto now missing. It had been over a month since his former student's disappearance. He worried and fretted over the boy even when he was close by. Trouble seemed to follow him like he was one big magnet. Now that he was out in the world by himself, that concern was only multiplied. Naruto was tough. Tougher than any kid he knew. He certainly had the potential to become a great shinobi as well, but sometimes he regretted passing him on that night. It was selfish, Iruka knew. Naruto had gone on to do so many great things just as a genin. Even saving the entire village from the Sans Jinchuriki. But that level of danger was too much for even a seasoned jonin, let alone a rookie academy graduate. Now that danger seemed to catch up with the hyperactive blonde. Iruka-sensei, Iruka-sensei, Iruka-sensei. What? He flinched, unaware of his own wandering thoughts. Yes, what is it, Mogi-chan? It's already 4 o'clock, she said. Oh? Indeed it is. Well, just finish up your assigned homework and get some rest for tomorrow's test. You're all dismissed. Yes, sensei. They all called out, with some scrambling for the door. Iruka waited for everyone to leave before he did a once-over of the classroom. He liked to make sure that no one forgot anything or left a mess for the janitorial staff. That done, he collected his materials. Despite wanting to go down to the hospital to get any more news on the third Hokage, he still had materials to go over for upcoming classes. He knew it would make his former leader proud to see him so dedicated despite his desire to go see him. Quite the instructor, aren't you, Iruka Umino? Iruka nearly dropped the papers from his arm. His hand had barely touched the bottom classroom door before he heard the voice behind him. The words cutting through his body like a sharp knife. They were not the words of a comrade. The feeling of danger was palpable. Thanks, he replied cautiously to the man in question. The first thing he noticed was the man's very meticulous and distinct brown uniform with white gloves and brown boots. To his knowledge, it was one usually worn by guards in maximum security prisons. However, the man also seemed to be wearing a black cloak with a long flared collar over top of it. The man himself was very pale in complexion. His face gaunt and piercing soulless black eyes. The color of his eyes matched his long hair that reached down past his shoulders. A very imposing and frightening man, to say the least. Definitely not someone who was from the Leaf Village. Can I know who you are and why you are in my classroom? Iruka asked, his hand slowly reaching for his kunai pouch. I am Lord Mui, master of Hozukijo. The Chunin froze. He's the warden of Hozuki prison. Iruka thought unnervingly. The guy was practically the boogeyman for all shinobi who even thought about going rogue. Being sent to Hozuki was practically a death sentence, as no one who went there ever escaped. And I am here to talk to you about Naruto Uzumaki. As you may be aware, he somehow managed to escape from my castle. Except for Naruto, it seemed. Iruka frowned. His confusion building. I'm sorry, I don't understand. What you're saying is completely ridiculous. I don't want to hear such stupid jokes when my student is missing. Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant. the warden stated coldly. The facts are that your Hokage sent the boy to Hozuki. The boy escaped. Now I must track him down. In doing so I need information from those closest to the boy. Iruka's body tensed. Even if any of the lies this man said were true, there had to be a good explanation behind them. Lady Hokage wouldn't do such a thing without a good reason. She seemed to have the overactive ninja's best interest in heart. So he sure as hell wouldn't give away any information to this bastard from a foreign nation. If you want information on Naruto, I'm afraid you'll need to go through the proper channels, Iruka argued. Set something up with Lady Hokage and I'll consider your request. While he had no intention of going along with this unless he was ordered to, he simply couldn't brush the man off. He knew very clearly the gap between them. You didn't get put in charge of the most infamous prison on the continent if you weren't powerful. I'm afraid that will be unnecessary, Mui claimed, pulling out a scroll from his cloak. I have a decree from feudal Lord Madoka giving me free rein to investigate the matter. All information regarding Uzumaki's unique background is known to me. I would even guess that I knew more than you yourself know of the boy's buried history. Iruka took the scroll. It was authentic, all right. The orders were irrefutable. That wasn't a good sign. It was true that much about Naruto's heritage was mysterious. As an orphan himself, he had tried to find out for the boy as a means to give him some semblance of closure. That search had quickly been halted by Lord Third for security reasons. No more information was given after that and he was ordered to drop the matter. But now it seemed this outsider was privy to it. If you have all the information, then why are you asking me? Ah, that gets to the real point of the issue I've had. What's been listed on his files paints a different picture from his true abilities. The warden's eyes narrowed. I am suspicious of whether his skills were purposely hidden during his time at the academy. While the comment was thrown as an accusation against his loyalties, Iruka couldn't help but laugh, irritating the dangerous man. While the idea of Naruto being sent to Hozuki Castle like some hardened criminal seemed so far-fetched to believe. Although it sounded much more realistic than Naruto being some secret genius that had his talents covered up by a handful of Chunin instructors. I'm sorry Lord Mui, that was inappropriate of me, but what you're suggesting is impossible. Mui's eyes narrowed. The evidence I have states otherwise. Advanced jutsu and skills no simple genin should have. Training from the legendary Jiraiya of the Sunin. Plus as a weapon of the leaf he is dash. Shut your mouth. Iruka yelled, angered by such hurtful words. Whatever proof you think you have is wrong. You weren't his teacher for 6 years like I was. You didn't see the heartbreak in his eyes when people looked at him like he shouldn't belong. Those feelings of sheer disappointment he felt when he failed. Naruto has struggled every step of the way to get where he is. Iruka threw the scroll at the pompous bastard's feet. So I don't care whose authority you have supporting you. I won't support this farce. The infamous warden stared him down. For a brief moment Iruka had thought his little outburst may have pushed the man enough to attack him. However, that moment passed quickly. Mui picked up the scroll before walking towards the door. You let your feelings cloud your judgment, Iruka Umino. I'll be merciful in this matter and keep this conversation between us. Have no doubts though, Naruto Uzumaki will be captured. Should you assist him before then, I can assure you that a comfy cell at Hozuki can be arranged for you next to your wayward student. The door slammed behind him as Iruka gritted his teeth at that threat. Slowly he reached down to pick his papers he dropped on the floor. As angry as he was towards the man, it was nothing compared to the anguish he felt for Naruto. The bitterness at how unfair this was. It was heart-wrenching that Naruto had to go through all this. Naruto, please be safe, please. Rah. Naruto grunted for the umpteenth time. His latest training being the most difficult so far. While his control over building up and releasing set amounts of chakra had improved by leaps and bounds thanks to his spirit training, his ability to convert it was far from his grasp at the moment. His sensei could transform his regular chakra to wind chakra instantly without the need for hand signs. He could not. Not by a long shot. Oh sure, this training could be simpler if he wanted it to be. Just do the bird hand seal and it would convert the chakra for him. Like one of those vegetable strainers he's heard about but has vehemently stayed away from. Convenience for this wasn't allowed though. His sensei had stated very clearly that if he couldn't do it at the drop of a hat from any point on his body, then it wasn't considered truly mastered. An important problem for him at the moment, as it was keeping him from using his newly constructed Kazujuha, his very own blade air cannon. His first attempt using it was a disaster. He had mistakenly thought regular chakra would have sufficed when filling the chamber. Sure, the pressure needle went up, but the damn thing exploded in his hand. His chakra expanding and bending the metal from within the chamber. It was only drawing out small amounts of the Nine Tails chakra that allowed his metal shredded hand to heal within a few days. From then on, his shadow clone did all the testing for him. Not that it mattered to Sasami and Menma though. His training now had a spectator to ensure he didn't do anything stupid. Much to his chagrin. I can't believe this is considered training, Sazanami jabbed. He was sitting against the wall, oiling down his blade. Shouldn't ninja training be more, I don't know, dangerous? Intensive? Yeah, well, it's more complicated than it seems, he defended, picking up the white rubber ball. Yes, for the last week he had foregone learning new jutsu from the library, even the ones Noriyuki had given him before he left. He wanted to get a handle on this first. It was fundamental for the third aspect of wind. For cutting, he still used that damnable coin Noriyuki had gifted him. He used that to practice in his off time or when traveling on the road. He had tried nearly 1,000 times to even make a small nick in the coin. Yet, it looked more pristine now than when he got it. His sensei hadn't been joking about it being made of the strongest metal in the world. Precision, thankfully, had been much easier. With all the loose rocks around, he had focused on shaping them into small, round balls to be used as ammunition. Many still had some noticeable bumps to them, but each of them were able to fit into the custom loader Sazanami had fashioned with a metal casing and a spring. It wasn't as fancy as Noriyuki's summoning ring, but it did the trick. That just left him with compression. He already had lots of experience with that area. Even before meeting Noriyuki with the third step to the Rasengan. In hindsight, it was only thanks to his shadow clone doing that part for him that allowed his Rasengan to be so concentrated. Now he could do it on his own without a clone aiding him, but only with his regular chakra. He dropped the ball to the ground after refilling it. Only slightly did it bounce slightly higher than before. Almost coming up to his waist at this point. Every day it was bouncing higher. Yet, he still felt like he had miles to go for every centimeter. Even with his shadow clones helping to speed up the process. Why don't you just fill it up with air before you go into battle? I don't see why you're making this harder than it has to be. Naruto frowned. He had already done that to ensure the weapon actually worked in the first place. Getting past how loud it was in such a confined space, the air cannon actually worked as it was supposed to. His accuracy with it was terrible. But, so had his skill with throwing shuriken and kunai at one point in time. It just took practice. He managed a small smile at the swordsman's faulty argument. For the same reason you don't buy a sword when you have the skills to make one. Sure, it's easier to just buy it, but having those skills honed is invaluable, he argued. You know son, it really chafes when you actually say something wise. Naruto shrugged. Yeah, well, I hear training helps to get rid of chafing. There are a lot of books and training tools for swordsmanship here, ya know. Sazanami shrugged. I'll pass. I've never actually been trained in swordsmanship before. Not really my thing. Everything I've learned has been through picking things up as I go. Besides, I'm still healing from my injuries. Rather not make them worse all the way out here. While it was true he was skilled for someone self-taught, Naruto knew that method had limits. He had been very much the same up until his final graduation exam. Only when he had access to materials and took the time to read something did he gain his signature technique. Stepping outside one's comfort zone was a key to strength, as his sensei would say. Menma and Sasami had taken to this place better than the lounging swordsman. His musical friend mainly secluded himself in his room. Only the faint sound of music could be heard from outside his door. When Menma decided to join them, he had brought along different instruments. Supposedly each could be used for different sound-based jutsu. While it all sounded cool, he was told that it was too dangerous to be around him, as Menma's control wouldn't be perfect. Menma did give him the occasional help with his shakuhachi flute from time to time. Progress had been limited. Naruto didn't want to get into it for various reasons. With Sasami she had locked herself in that storage room behind the library. After the second night she claimed that she found an area to focus in. There had been no mention as to what that was though. Any questions on the matter were returned with a subtle smile. Her reasoning for the secrecy was that it was a secret she wanted to show off later. So for now that's what it was. The only other time everyone saw each was during dinner. They each promised that they would have one full meal together each day. The rest of the time it was something simple they each prepared for themselves. It was perfect for him since he was up late at night training anyway, it gave him extra time to sleep. Speaking of which, he didn't understand those two. While they were traveling it made sense. They had a single large tent and they were trying to save on expenses when staying at inns. Sleeping in close proximity was a necessity. So now that they each had access to their own rooms it made him question why they decided to use them to store their stuff while asking to sleep in his. They both dragged the mattresses over to his room, a smaller one, as he would rather not use his grandfather's until it was thoroughly sanitized, making it a nightly sleepover between the three. Any questions as to why were returned with a shrug and a Sazanami opted not to follow suit, otherwise there wouldn't have been any room. So, what's the plan, kid? How long do we plan on sticking around? Not that I mind this place, but I'm someone who likes being on the move. They had already been here a week. While the supplies they had here would certainly last them months if not years, the likelihood of staying here that long were not favorable. He had doubted Noriyuki wanting him to just stay here for years getting stronger before setting out. His sensei was a man who thought experience was a better teacher than formal training. With said formal training building off that experience for maximum effect. They could easily take resources with them and train as they went. It seemed the most advantageous for Noriyuki's training style. The problem remained where they would go next. Ultimately Naruto was back where he started before his sensei gave him that book. He had no idea what his next step would be. Sure, the names gave him some direction, but how would he decide? Holding the book out, closing his eyes and pointing to a name randomly sounded fun, at least until his first attempt landed on the Akatsuki. He decided a little more forethought would be best instead. To be perfectly honest, I don't dash. Guys. You all need to come see this. Sasami's voice echoed through the halls. They heard her steps approach the training chamber. Bursting in with an unbridled amount of excitement. Naruto. You need to see this right now. Okay, sure, let's go then. Not like he had anything else planned anyway. Come on forward, keep up. Ino shouted. The target is almost out of sight. Sakura didn't respond to her friend's complaint. Even letting the nickname slide for the dozenth time. It didn't matter to her anymore. It all felt so pointless to worry about something that was also pointless. Whether they succeeded or failed didn't matter to her anymore. She just wanted this to be over with. Just 2 more months, she muttered, tugging hard on the extra large headband wrapped around her forehead. Then it can all be over. She increased her cadence. Still keeping within distance of Ino, lest she complain even more. The girl's voice had grown more irritating to Sakura over the past month. The constant pestering and prodding only aggravated her. Even as Ino taunted her, it only seemed to distance herself with her oldest friend rather than participate in their usual banter. Ino just didn't get it. She never would either. Sakura was done being a ninja. Only for the sake of her withdrawal papers backlogged to be processed was this happening to her. Her medical leave was cut short by Lady Tsunade. An order that she be placed in Team 10 until the paperwork was done. When she complained about how long such a simple form would take, the Hokage had yelled at her, stating she was weeks behind on her work thanks to Naruto's disappearance. Sakura didn't say anything after that, begrudgingly taking on the temporary role until she was allowed to leave. Despite Team 10's best efforts, her inclusion into the group had only been awkward for everyone. Asuma-sensei treating them to barbecue shortly after her joining was not what they had hoped. She hadn't felt hungry and didn't feel like sharing much with her new teammates. This was only a temporary arrangement. Even if she had still wanted to remain a ninja, they would never be her team. They couldn't just stick her in a new one and expect her to just be happy with it. What Team 7 had was unique and special. Anything else would only be a cheap imitation at best. Asuma-sensei says they have been cut off up ahead, Koji shouted. The overweight boy had been worse than Ino in a lot of ways. It was Asuma-sensei who had let slip that it was Koji's idea to bring her into Team 10. While he didn't pester her as much as Ino did, he always tried to play peacemaker. Like there were rough edges that needed to be sanded out before they would all mesh together. It was that hope he conveyed that pissed her off the most. That this arrangement would get better. It wouldn't. Right, let's get these guys already. Ino called back. At the end of the clearing were the 3 thieves they had been chasing. Just some common ones with no shinobi training whatsoever. Her mind drifted during the mission briefing, so she had no idea of what they actually stole. Some money or useless trinket most likely. They're trying to split up. Let's each take one, Ino suggested, already veering off to the left. Got it. Koji said, taking the right. Without her acknowledgement, she was left with the one still running straight ahead. He was huffing, gasping for breath as he weaved through the trees. In his hands was a large sack. The items he most likely pilfered. Even at her sluggish pace, the man was barely several feet ahead. Eventually the chase stopped when he ran up to a steep ledge, nearly stumbling over the side into the chasm below. He let out a cry, throwing the bag to push his distribution of weight away from the drop. Ironic that he gave them up to save himself from the situation he found himself in after stealing them. She was already standing behind him as he turned. A bit of a surprise to see the man was actually a boy only slightly older than her. Shoulder-length black hair, dark eyes, and a complexion like porcelain. It spooked her how similar he looked to. The boy's face went from a mixture of emotions. Confusion, shock, realization, and finally, rage. No. I won't get captured. There's no way I'm going to prison after all this. Even if I have to kill you. The black-haired boy pulled out a knife, running at her. She saw it a mile away. There were easily half a dozen ways she could avoid it. But her body wouldn't move. As a reward and for old time's sake, I'll be merciful and kill you swiftly. Goodbye, Sakura. The boy's look of rage only brought back flashes of her final moments with Sasuke. The despair and hopelessness she felt as the one she loved. She stood helplessly as the boy's knife was arm's length from her chest. She could only grit her teeth and close her eyes. Sakura. A voice called to her as she felt a gust of wind on her back. The heavy scent of cigarette smoke filling her nostrils. She opened her eyes to see the boy lying unconscious before her with Asuma-sensei standing above him. A look of concern on the bearded man's face. Her head throbbed in agony. She couldn't take it anymore as she collapsed to the ground. She could still hear Asuma talking. Ino and Koji voices coming soon after. All trying to reach her. All trying to help her. They just didn't get it. They just wouldn't leave her alone. Sazanami stretched his back as he watched this little demonstration Sasami had planned. She had sounded so excited that he thought it was something groundbreaking or at least entertaining. This hideout had certainly been full of surprises after all. It was nice to know that this place was here for them. He doubted anyone would find them should they decide to lay low again. Turns out the big announcement was more shinobi stuff. She called them into the small room next to the library. It was lit up, claiming it to be more than just a barren empty space. So what's up, Sasami-chan? Naruto asked. You guys won't believe what I found. This is probably the greatest resource your sensei left us, Naruto. The kid glanced around. An invisible weapon. He guessed. Sazanami couldn't help but snort. That's what he would have said as well. No, look on the floor. Do you see the pattern? Actually, looking closely, the stone floor did have faint black lines forming an intricate circle. Most of it looked like black squiggles made by a child. That or it was some strange language with the weirdest characters he had ever seen. Whatever the case, it really didn't seem all that impressive. A summoning circle, Menma said. Sazanami quirked an eyebrow. A what circle? We ninja have techniques that allow us to seal and transport objects over great distances. Mainly through the use of paper and sealing ink, Menma explained. I have never seen one like this though. That's what's important about it, Sasami claimed, it's a transportation seal. Holding out a book, she went into further detail. So I was training in here and saw the seal on the floor. I wanted to find out what it was. The book was already laid out on one of the desks. So just what does it transport, Sasami-chan? I wasn't too sure at first. My knowledge in sealing jutsu was mainly with the jutsus of my clan. I didn't think something so complicated could be explained so easily. I read through it cover to cover twice to make sure I wasn't mistaken. She pointed to the opposite wall. Then once I saw that everything clicked and I knew it was true. Holding up a lantern, the wall behind them showed an etching of the continent. It actually went into great detail with marking the landscapes of the various mountains and valleys. There were no lines to indicate borders though. It was all one marking with no nations. Sasami pointed to a section on the map. If he had to guess, it was their current location. Squinting, there was an X mark denoting the position of the hideout. Sasami then began to understand what she was trying to show them. Looking carefully, he could make out other X marks. 4 others to be precise. All reaching to the 4 corners of the continent. So you're saying there are more bases like this one, Sasami assumed. Yes, but that's not the most important part. The book states there are seals like this one in each of the other locations. All connected to one another. She shouted excitedly. Sasami didn't understand. There were other bases, but they were connected by this writing on the ground. He was really glad that he never got caught up with all that shinobi stuff. Seemed a little ridiculous at times if you asked him. Naruto let out a gasp. Muttering something quietly about his sensei. The seal, it transports people, doesn't it, Sasami-chan? Yes, it does. All that is required for it to work is to let the seal absorb the blood of the person who intends to use it, then it will allow them to use it by using the corresponding seal with each specific base. So you're saying we can teleport to the other bases on the map instantaneously? Naruto gasped. His level of shock and awe now reaching Sasami's level. She giggled, grasping Naruto's arms excitedly. Yes. Exactly. Now this he understood. Actually, he was still really lost on just how the whole thing worked, but he got the gist of it. This circle on the floor would allow them to move across the continent in a moment's notice. Trekking across land that could take weeks to months to reach. Such a thing was practically invaluable to just about anyone. The things they could accomplish with such a thing was staggering. He had been skeptical about all this. Well, he still was really skeptical, but now there was something real about this goal Naruto had. Going up against the leaders of nations was suicide by every measure. The chances of getting caught or killed was nearly 100%. Unless they could move at distances they couldn't reach. His muscles tightened. Does this actually work? Sasami asked slowly. It does, she confirmed. The seal lit up when I let my blood drop in the center. Naruto stepped up, taking her confirmation with no uncertainty. Biting his thumb, the blonde let a drop of blood hit the circle on the floor. Just as Sasami had said, the circle did light up. The lines glowed red for several moments before dying back down. It did seem like this seal thing had actual merit to it. The kid then rubbed his hands together. Okay. Let's try this teleportation thing out. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, but you can't, Sasami quickly said. The look of confusion and disappointment was evident on Naruto's face as she said those words. It's a safety precaution. It can only transport you to other seals that have been keyed to your blood. So we'll have to wait until we get to one of the other bases. Sorry, Naruto. Menma said, patting their leader on the back apologetically. The musician then did the same with his blood too. The seal lit up once more. Menma then stepped out of the way, gesturing for him to step forward as well. Guess we'll eventually see if it works later then, he muttered, cutting his thumb on the edge of his blade. With that, all 4 had keyed their blood into the seal. So now that begs the question, what base are we heading for next, kid? Naruto smirked. I guess it does. My sensei said to me that everything in this base and everything connected to it were now mine. At the time I never thought it could refer to something like this though. Just means that he was richer than you thought, he joked. Too rich by my count. Naruto laughed. So what base is closest to this one, Sasami-chan? She unfolded a map, laying it down on the floor. This one actually listed all the different nations and territories, using it as an overlay for the unlabeled one etched into the wall. Tracing her fingers to the corresponding spot, she tapped it with her nail. Right here. Roughly located within the land of forests. That's still quite a ways to go. Naruto grunted. A noticeable amount of frustration mixed in with it. We'll have to cross through the land of fire if we want to get there quickly. Guess there's no choice then. That'll be our next destination, he declared. They all gave nods or responses of approval to that plan. Sazanami had never been that far east before. A small smile formed on his lips. Things were definitely going to be interesting from here on. He couldn't wait. Orochimaru sat casually on a large rock as his opponent lay down his arms in surrender. The man had caught his eye during his movement to the next rendezvous he had lined up. Passing through some insignificant country, he had caught sight of him while he was using a very convincing disguise. Passing himself off as an elderly man. Servants hauling him around in a wooden palanquin. His interest piqued, he snatched the man up to find out what sort of game he was playing. With his disguise gone, revealing a younger man, it turned out his suspicions had been correct. The one before him was a ninja. A foolish one at that. Using simple jutsu and tricks to fight him. Orochimaru didn't even move an inch to halt the man in his tracks. His intent and chakra flared to the point he trembled before falling to his hands and knees. Please forgive me. I had no idea how strong you were. I had no idea you were a master. The man begged. His head practically digging into the ground. Oh relax. I don't have any intention of harming you. Merely curious to your purpose in this land. Releasing this intent, the man raised his head. His eyes widened in shock. Wait a moment, you are dash. Someone who likes his questions answered. Orochimaru cut it. Immediately. Yes. Of course, Lord Orochimaru. I am the leader of the Watari. Simply known as Hokage, the man explained. He went further into his purpose and reasoning for his disguise. Even going so far as to reveal the heinous acts he had committed since his arrival. Some of which made Orochimaru snicker. Interesting. So you wish to rule this land? Yes, my lord. Giving the Watari its own home has been its true goal for a long time. Orochimaru licked his lips. He could work with this. What is a home if you lack the strength to defend it? The power to expand its borders. Even if your plan comes to fruition, it could simply be taken away by any of its neighbors. Yes, you are correct. Then how about I offer you the power to crush any who come to take what you have rightfully worked for? The fool's eyes already gave him the answer he needed. That look of greed was worn on him like his own clothing. This would be a nice way to locate the one he was after. Absolutely, Lord Orochimaru. I will humbly accept anything you could grant me. The Sunin was already molding his chakra. A new experiment he wanted to try. One based on previous research that proved positive results. Excellent. I do have one condition, however. Whatever it is, I swear myself and the rest of the Watari to fulfilling it. Orochimaru laughed. His hand reaching out to the man. The seal stretched its way across Hoki's body. He writhed around in pain as it slowly spread. By the Sunin's estimates, the man was strong enough to withstand the transformation. With the power it would bestow him, he was sure that Naruto-kun would come. His spies telling of his sighting in the area. It was a shame he wouldn't be around to see it. It was strange to see the real sky after looking at a fake one for so long. Had decided to head out after their third week. Deciding now would be the best time, as they had accomplished much of what they wanted to do here. Even when the idea of seeking out the other base immediately sounded enticing. Sasami and Menma said they needed more time to work on their new techniques. It worked out perfectly for him, as it gave him time to finish his training. Only 2 days ago did he finally manage to get the conversion down. His weapon worked with his sealless supply of wind chakra. It just took all of his concentration to do, required almost 5 minutes to fill to maximum, and he had to remain still while doing so. He would stick to using the bird seal for a while. Thankfully he sent a few clones to practice the exercise while he picked up 2 simpler wind-style jutsu. Those had been much simpler to learn. in a single day. Sazanami had even helped forge and sharpen weapons for them. They were stocked up on shuriken, kunai, and smoke bombs now. The blacksmith even made him a few metal rounds for his air cannon. So he couldn't wait to try it out. Is everything set, Sasami? Naruto asked. She nodded, patting down her bag. While her knowledge in sealing was limited, she understood the workings of the basic transportation seal. Now they could carry more objects with them and store items for much longer. It would really save them a lot of effort later on. He had already set a travel plan. It wasn't completely straight but would help to throw off anyone that picked up on their trail. Hopefully with 3 weeks of laying would have made that trail ice cold. Although he would give a lot of kudos to someone who followed them all the way out here. The base's entrance shut behind them. Naruto shifted the sand with his wind to hide the entrance. They had no way to know when the next sandstorm would occur, so a bit of due diligence was required. The next time they came back would hopefully not require them to open the entrance at all. It would certainly be a novel experience to travel at such distances. Getting there would be a pain in the ass though. Naruto held Noriyuki's dagger on his palm. They were headed back north, so the blade pointed the way. They were essentially going back the way they came, but Sazanami assured them of a path they could take that was rarely used. Meaning it was perfect for sneaking into the land of fire. Naruto adjusted his hat, angling it to block the sun. The land of fire. I wonder how everyone's doing. He. Won't they be in for a surprise? That's it for part 9. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.